Thank you to the NYU Global Leadership Scholars and all other guests that are here in person and joining us virtually. Thank you for joining us tonight for a fireside chat with Dr. Kofi Anani to talk about his new book, Leadership in Independent Africa, 6 Decades On. I am Corey Holmes, and I will be your moderator for the evening. I also teach a course entitled The Politics of Public Policy, and previously taught the Privatization and Public Policy course here at NYU DC campus. Firstly, I would like to thank the NYU DC family, specifically Dr. Carrie Miller, the NYU DC Program Director, NYU Academic Fellow Victoria Cagle, and Thomas McIntyre, the Director of External Programs, for providing a platform for this much-needed talk on Africa and the way forward. As a disclaimer, the views I articulate tonight are of my own and not those of any organization I may be affiliated with. In a past life, I also worked at the State Department in the Africa Bureau and also in the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Africa, Global Health, and Global Human Rights. Recently, I was in Southern Africa in Lusaka, Zambia, and Cape Town and Johannesburg, South Africa, to discuss and analyze the digital divide and countering disinformation and state-form malign information. Although dis and misinformation is prevalent everywhere, including the United States, when compounded with other issues such as food insecurity, unemployment, violent extremism, and weak and unaffordable public education infrastructures, I believe this problem, if unchecked, will explode on the continent. This is the very reason the continent must have stronger leadership, governance, and opportunity for all its citizens, not just those in capitals and metropolitan cities. However, those of us who really engage the continent know it's not all doom and gloom. I also teach an Intro to Africa course at Howard University, where my students engage on topics such as religion, music, politics, economics, history, language, and culture. They have researched the likes of Nelson Mandela, Julius Nyerere, Kenneth Kaunda, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Haile Selassie, and Robert Mugabe. We have also discussed how African governance and leadership has been a subject of extensive debate and analysis over an extended period of time, starting with Ethiopia, which is the oldest independent country in Africa, and one of the oldest in the world dating back millions of years, on through Liberia's independence in 1847, Ghana's independence in 1957, South Africa's first inclusive election in 1994, and then most recently, South Sudan gaining sovereignty in 2011. But there's still a stench of colonialism permeating through the continent, and it has metamorphosed into neo-colonialism. Many of us know the lines were drawn during the Berlin Conference or the Scramble for Africa in 1884 and early 1885. People were separated from their families, and identities and culture was lost. People were conquered to ease trading with colonizers from France, Germany, and other European countries who exploited Africans for their own personal and financial gain. But we must ask ourselves this question: at what point do liberators and heads of state start to govern for all its citizens? At what point do citizens demand more from their leaders? Again, while visiting Southern Africa, I spoke with young professionals who are poised to do just that. Hold their leaders accountable and find a way or make one, regardless of the barriers put in front of them, including lack of good governance and the digital divide. But again, we must remember that the continent, for the most part, is very young. And when you juxtapose that with the age of the United States at 247 years old, Canada at 156, and China, which is thousands of years old. So again, it is great to have Dr. Kofi Anani to help us navigate the terrain of what can be done as we look for long-term sustainable solutions, mutually beneficial partnerships with the continent of Africa. With that, I will now yield the floor to Dr. Anani for his open remarks.
Okay, thank you, Corey, for the introductory remarks. Can you please hear me? Yeah, okay. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to NYU DC, especially Tom McIntyre, and then who is in charge of external relations, Dr. Kerry Miller, who is in charge of programming, and Victoria, the academic fellow who is with us, and also the audience who is there with us in this code, and also those participating online as well. Would like to, I really appreciate for choosing my book as the focus for this event, a co-curricular event for the Global Leadership Program. I sincerely appreciate this gesture. From the onset, let me state that the focus of the key message of the book, that to establish, to select leaders based on Western democratic ideals, that's elections, multi-party politics, and also between between leaders selected on the basis of African norms and conventions. It's not about romanticizing ancient institutional practices, but rather it is a response to how resources are exploited and accumulated, resource accumulation and exploitation within the global village that militate against transformating development in Africa. This gesture by the NYU community, NYU DC community, is to enable learning and a reflection on leadership and governance challenges stemming from the principles of representation, transparency, accountability, and participation. Simply because, as we've been reminded for some time now, or several years ago, we've been reminded that in the particular case of Africa, for instance, things have long fallen apart. And the cracks are widening and deepening. So we need to be able to understand the perspective from which we are coming from. And during the discussions, we'll be able to have questions related to the specific reason why this proposal is being made. And I'll do my best to be able to provide my responses to this. And at the same time, I'll also guide you to look at the details in the book. At the same time, we are reminded also that the wretched of the earth, in the words of Frantz Fanon, for instance, the army of the wretched of the earth keeps on swelling exponentially across the globe. And this is an army of people who are idle and who are vulnerable and roam the streets of the cities of Africa. And they are frustrated with the older generations for dereliction of responsibilities as well. And this is an army of people who don't even think that participating in election is important, but unless they are induced or incentivized to be able to do that. An army of people who will definitely who want to embark on a journey through the Mediterranean and leave the shores of the continent and never get back. But at the same time, they are looking for opportunities, greener pastures elsewhere. And in this context, it is something that we need to be, all of us here, we are in a global village, all of us need to be able to think about and reflect on, as maybe they may not have the voice to be able to articulate what is important or what they need, etc. But at the same time, we need to be able to understand where they are coming from in terms of availability of resources, but they are not able to be able to participate effectively, and they don't see the need for them to be able to engage effectively because they are not seeing the dividends based on the natural resources that they have on the ground, etc. So I would not want to take too much time, but then I just want to be able to hand over to, so we can kickstart, hand over to Corey. We can kickstart the conversation, the dialogue. So on this note, I'll ask you to go ahead and then we start the conversation so that I will be able to provide further insight into some of the issues that we face.
Okay, will do. Thank you, Dr. Anani, for those introductory remarks. For reference, audience here in person and also online, we will discuss some points in the book and then engage with you all. I will start the conversation and asking a few questions, but we'll then turn to the audience both in person and virtually. No, okay, so just in person, okay. So Dr. Anani, your book prescribes specific solutions for Africa. Again, it's entitled Leadership in Independent Africa, 6 Decades On, and it delves into the intricate challenges faced by African nations and proposes an innovative solution grounded in the principles of representation, transparency, accountability, and participation. So correct me if I'm wrong, but are you calling for a blended representation principle model, advocating a connection between leaders elected through multi-party based elections at the national level and traditional leaders chosen based on indigenous norms for local governance? What made you come up with this model? And how can it best positively affect change and strengthening democracy and good governance on the continent? When region to region and country to country, we both know they have different challenges.
Thank you very much for the question. I think this is an interesting question. I'll break it down into the various parts so that I could respond to it. And I think it will capture the gist of the substance of the book about. The reason why this proposition is very relevant to this context, let's look at the social structure of the first is about the social structure of the 54 African nations. If you look at the nations objectively, you realize that it consists of structurally patterned Western cities, townships, and enclaves, and the remnants of traditional African societies, communities. So it's important that the operational framework or the politics, organizational life of the nation should reflect these social characteristics. But in practice, it doesn't. If we consider the second point I want to highlight is about the nation building agenda and the nation building narrative. It's either based on imitation, our assimilation, or wholesale replication of institutional practices and institutional arrangement from outside. So then the narrative was mainly driven by the fact was made that whatever, there was nothing good about Africa. All that, the engine of transformation has to be based on institutional arrangement from outside, without even looking at it from the perspective that the cultural practices of these institutions definitely alienate the people, majority of the people, but at the same time, the leadership arrangement that were there became spoils of domination. And there was nothing good about that. That's how the state designs and structure and the shapes were established. And that became the engine of transformation. So at that moment, right now, today, we are seeing a lot of authoritarianism as well as impunity in terms of resources being used, public resources being used. So that has been the agenda. So from that moment, independence was attained and packaged to a few political elites, educated elites. So without actually the leadership institution that is able to penetrate the grassroots and mobilize the grassroots around a common vision or collective efforts. So we have hanging states that's unable to penetrate. You will see crowds during elections and during events, etc. But maybe those crowds, if you look at it carefully, they could be biased, they could be rented. These are all in the literature. So in effect, in practice, we have an anomaly in development governance. A governance system that is unable to get the people to participate effectively and to be involved in development efforts, a transformational effort of the nations, etc. So, for instance, when the former President Barack came to Ghana in 2009, he mentioned that Africa does not need strong men, but rather they need strong institutions. But you cannot build strong institutions when you are unable to bring in, or you are unable to use your leadership institutional arrangement to bring the majority of the people together around a common vision or around collective efforts. You cannot do that. So there is a need to be able to reconstruct the narrative of Africa's participation within the global community. You cannot have one leg in the global community and one leg in subsistence and expect strong institutions to come out of that. So that's one the reasons why this proposal is being made. Yeah, and at the same time, let me just highlight there are issues that as students of the Global Leadership Program, you need to be able to understand Africa, the reality of Africa as it is, because nothing will change when we don't accept the reality. And accepting reality as it is a major, a character trait of a good leader. Secondly, you need to be able to develop a keen interest in solutions, because the global development literature is very heavy on diagnostics, but very light on treatment and cure, to use a health metaphor. And this is what set apart this publication from others of this category. You also need to, once you come out with that solution, you also need to be able to think about the implementation of that, solution, because the easiest part of every endeavor or mission is formulation and articulation of the thought. But the most difficult part is to be able to enforce or the process of occurrence. That's the most difficult part. And also you need to be able to understand that there are distance shrinking information communication technologies. You need to take that into consideration because Africa, for instance, is no longer a remote continent somewhere on the planet somewhere that things are Africa, you can easily, with social media handles, the people may not even be able to come here, but they know what is the information sharing is ongoing. We need to look at that. And also you need to look at social groups within academia and the policy establishment as strategic vectors of or carriers of messages. And the last thing I want to put across for you is to be able to also understand how to get the message. You want to be able to disseminate the message. So you need to be able to understand that there is an open access process with creative common license. And on this note, I would like to say that this publication is free to anyone who has access to the internet. And I will also be pleased to say that NYU is part of the group of, is on the list of group of academic libraries that have made this publication open access and have made it available to people to be able to have access to it. So that's a kudos on the part of NYU as well, because we want to be able to let everybody within the global community understand the situation that is going on. So,
Thank you. So that leads me into my next question. You argue that drastic changes are needed within Africa's institutions to resolve the slow development that has plagued the continent since many countries became independent. Several countries come to mind for me. Zimbabwe, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Those last two, by the way, had recent coups in Burkina and Niger. So let's take Zimbabwe, for instance. The foreign minister, the finance minister, and the health minister asked for your help to counter socioeconomic and political downfalls and implement a new strategy for the country that would yield tangible results within a year. What would those solutions be? And how would you implement those solutions?
I mean, interesting question. Yeah, first of all, I will say that you should focus on feeding the nation. A nation that cannot feed itself is a nation that will not be, if you cannot feed your people, it's a nation that cannot be taken as seriously. And many Africans, they are always with with begging bowl. So the first strategy that I will say is mostly about agriculture. And I will not go into details. We have something called seed to plate approach, which is the details. I will not provide the details here, but the details are there. It's about making sure that agriculture is very attractive and profitable so that it can attract many people within the sector, people who are idle. And so the details are there. So you look at the value chain of agriculture. That's why it's called seed to plate. You look at the value chain. The second strategy that we need to look at is the issue of education. You need to be able to educate the people, provide make investment in infrastructure, instructional and learning materials, etc. And also intergenerational responsibility, people to understand the values that underline issues of resource exploitation, resource accumulation, distribution, etc. Third strategy is about issue of, we talk about labor mobility. You need to be able to reduce that vulnerability and idleness. But how do you do that? You need to be able to, the job, jobs, create jobs. We have digital skills. People need to learn digital skills because that's the future. Because what happens right now is that in Africa, in some places, for instance, in Nigeria, South Africa, Morocco, corporate companies like Amazon or Microsoft, they go in and look at all these programs and try to relocate them. But if we focus on that, it will generate we focus on mass skill development in digitalization, programming and coding, that will enable a lot of people, especially the younger ones, to be able to have skills that are usable and at home and abroad, anywhere they are, to create jobs. And also you have to be able to utilize technology for conservation, for construction. We need that. And you only want a 12 months strategy. But well, yeah, I mean, I'm saying, because you know our government. Yeah, but at the same time, you need to know that development is a long-term process. Transformation, you don't use bandage approaches. You need to be able to understand that short-term may bring the short-term benefit, but at the same time, in order to be able to have impact, you need to be able to focus on things beyond 1 year in order to be able to make the necessary impact. And then you need to have an understanding of housing, what kind of, because there are various places, how do you improve various deposits, natural deposits of clay and things like that? How do you improve these things and transform them into housing and household equipment and things like that? These are all lying down there in a very incipient manner, not being taken into consideration. So I'll concentrate on that, those strategies, a healthy economy, health strategy. The age, as I said, age is health, education, agriculture, labor, technology, and housing. Those are the key things that if you focus on, you get the dividend from participating. You will not even beg people or incentivize people to go and participate or to be able to make an impact or to contribute to nation building.
Before I turn it over to the audience, I just want to have a quick follow-up question. So, how do you engage young people in the agriculture sector? And I ask that because while in South Africa, I interviewed several hundreds of young people, and they did not want to engage in the agriculture. They thought it was something that was, for old people. And, although they knew food security is very important, they didn't want to be bogged down with the daily mundane work because farming is hard, right? Farming is grueling, right? And so, how would you engage young people?
If you take the value chain, for instance, you can't be using horse and cattle and expect people to engage in agriculture. You can't be relying on rain and then expect people to be involved without any support. But if you have business support facilities in catchment areas, you will be able to draw people looking at the value. Every step or stage of the value chain is a business unexplored. They are not exploring those things. You have to make it attractive and profitable because these are businesses, from the land preparation through to the plate, which is basically bringing food on the table. How do you ensure that you provide the investment and support that they need in order to be able to transform that agriculture? There are basic things that they are doing now. Africa never had a coherent food policy because one thing was that food agriculture was not considered as a cash crop. So they concentrate on those things that will bring cash, immediate cash, etc., in terms of cocoa, coffee, etc. But that's the more reason why if you talk to energy, they don't want to go into agriculture. But there are benefits and there are avenues of opportunities over there if you concentrate, if you have a strategy devoted to making sure that there are certain things, certain practices that need to, and there is market availability, and all those things have to take into consideration. So you need a focused strategy in order to engage the youth, to get them to do it. Yeah, as you know, it's not easy. So.
Thank you. I want to turn it over to the audience for questions for Dr. Anani. In the front.
Thank you for such a perceptive question. It is because throughout the century you've been to school and then you've been taught that your cultural heritage is inferior and the land that you may never in your lifetime is superior. That's how you've been taught all that. So we need to be able to, through public education, we need to be able to educate ourselves from that mental enslavement, which for the lack of better. We need to be able to address that because the education you go to public schools, public education, you are supposed to share your own cultural heritage. And then whilst embrace what doesn't belong to you, and you may never even be able to. And this is the part of education. You need to be able to grow up and be able to break out of that in order to be able to have that, build that self-confidence and to be able to adapt and cope with the exigencies of the time. And as I mentioned, as a result of proliferation of information communication technology, you may not go there, but you may not have stepped your foot there, but at the same time, you understand what is going on. So it will take some time and a focused strategy by the leadership to be able to execute and be able to bring up what is very important, what is necessary to inculcate in the population. That there is something also good. That's the more reason why this issue of representation is key. Because if we have confidence in our system as a foundation, we can ensure that there is transparency and we can ensure that people are held accountable for policy, especially when it's financed by the public purse. We take out authoritarianism and impunity when it comes to the public resource. This will build the confidence.
Other questions?
Okay. Yeah, it's about engaging the diaspora. It's one thing we have to understand also is that the leadership is essential. The countries, for instance, China, Malaysia, and all the other Asian countries have put in place coherent diaspora policies to engage the diaspora in terms of education, in terms of investment, in terms of skills. How do you utilize it? How do you ensure that when I get home and I embark on something, or what are the incentives that are provided to these people in order for you to be able to utilize your skills over there? If the leadership has a coherent strategy, definitely I'm sure these countries, especially China and others, have a coherent strategy in order to be able to tap into the skills and the resources of their diaspora, and they target it. So you need to be able to have a coherent strategy in order to be able to bring in the diaspora skills and in terms of education, and especially when you have information communication technology, you need to be able to utilize that so that the skills that are outside can also impact the skills that are within. And you will not do it in isolation, and you will be able to blend the two and make sure that you are able to inculcate in the younger generation what needs to be done to tackle the exigencies of the moment.
Now very so my question is, like, given the rise of social media, people having access to so much information, also getting their government corruption. All this can be together. Many governments are thinking, how do they, the government can gain trust from their citizens, given that there is so much information, negative information without, and given that in order for us to work together to want to go, I have to trust you, right? So how is government kind of about media, those readiness in the fight?
Yes, thank you. Social media handles have been all over the place, and right now the problem with that has also been the issue of information literacy. How will you be able to differentiate between what is good and what kind of information is correct? So the issue of transparency and accountability is very important, because transparency inculcates trust or generate trust in people. If you shroud contracts in secrecy, contracts on resources that you think you have in abundance in various places, and there's no transfer, there's no accountability, and you only have a system whereby you generate friends, family, and cronies economy and neglect majority of the people, they are not going to trust. So regardless of whether people have social media handles, etc., and can communicate with each other, with the ball has to, you need to be able to inculcate in the leadership that has access to those resources, trust, respect, and loyalty. These are some of the things that we need to do in order to be able to inculcate that systems of government that we generate will enable us to be able to have the benefit of the information communication technologies that are available to everyone.
Just before I get to your question, I would also say freedom of speech and freedom of press is tantamount, right? When you think of, I won't say all, because I never like to throw a blanket statement on a continent, but in some countries when they have elections, right, they shut down the internet, right? And so, like Dr. Anani said, accountability at the highest levels. So they can build that trust with citizens. When you have elections, the information is transparent and it's open, right? I think that would be a good start, right? And just one more point. So also, I was at Africon, which is a big digital conference on the continent. In fact, it's the biggest digital conference on the continent. It's usually in Cape Town. And you had practitioners, academics, folks from government talking about the digital divide, but also they were talking about how to use artificial intelligence, because right now AI is, it's the big bad boogie person, and but it also can be used, if used wisely. It can be used as a benefit. For instance, company called Full Fact, right out of the UK, for the Nigerian elections that happened earlier this year, where we talk about disinformation, right? This company went in and fact checked not only misinformation, because misinformation is information that is maybe false, but it's not deliberate. Disinformation is deliberate, right? And so they fact check journalists, they fact check the government, and it was a third-party source. That's also how, to Dr. Anani's accountability piece, right? Having a third-party source fact check during elections and other events of that nature. So I just wanted to state that. Young lady, your question.
How do these strategies public policy should be addressed in African countries with a lot of political polarization? And there's so much like the divides.
The main issue here is try to create a framework within which the people will be able to utilize be familiar with the rules of engagement, and be familiar with the rules of engagement, and then use the access and influence that they have with their leadership to be able to generate or to create accountability or transparency in the use of the public purse. If that doesn't happen, it's so difficult for you to be able to even operate basic things, because if we talk about poverty, without participation of the majority, effective participation, you cannot address the issue of poverty. We need to be able to influence or whatever is being done at that level to be able to empower the institutional arrangements that they can use to ensure that decisions are taken in the interest of the people. I don't know whether I've answered your question clearly, but then at the same time, if you can help me with the question, yeah.
Do you have a specific country in mind?
Yes, I know.
It's a hotbed.
The religious group, yeah. Yeah, we have you right now. The phenomenon of a religious group that we have is a proliferation of churches, miracle. They preach miracle, instant gratification, that you will be able to generate wealth instantly, etc. But at the same time, you need to be able to understand that the issue of the traditional issue of hard work is also must be there, must be taught. You cannot stay in church throughout the week of Monday to Friday and expect food to be on your table. So these are some of the issues that have gone into addressing some of these cases that have gone out of hand. You have a situation where many people wake up and thinking that somebody elsewhere will be able to provide the basic needs that you need. And if you stay in church all day, it's not going to happen. So those religious divide issues, people hide under those things in order to be able to brainwash and bring in things that may not necessarily be what the leadership may need or may think that is wise. But then at the same time, they follow this leadership. They follow their religious leaders intimately, and neglect what needs to be done realistically. So these are some of the issues that needs to be addressed.
And specifically to Ethiopia, I would just say this. It is my understanding it's more of an ethnic conflict than a religious one, right? So with the Oromos and the Tigrayans and Amharas, right? So more of an ethnic conflict than a religious one. Questions, but I want to turn back to the book. Okay, one more question, then I want to turn back to the book. Go ahead.
South Sudan has been like so many people internally, millions of people internally displaced. Conflict and in the DRC as well in the last few months or even in the last few years. Do you think the West is genuine? Do you think it's necessary for Africa to have the West helping them to grow as a nation? But also on the other hand, do you think the West cares enough for the people? All do the global citizens care enough about Africa to be invested and for advocating for peace in Africa? Or are they concerned? Do you see a reaction from the world with issues in Africa? And are they concerned about Africa's growth? And do you think Africa needs, everyone else's attention and everyone else's support for it to grow as a nation, or can it just independently do it on its own?
That's interesting. Yeah, from from time immemorial, the nothing good about Africa narrative has dominated. Africa is mainly relevant when it comes to the resources, the riches, and the wealth, etc. Right now, in the interest of many from our side, it's mainly on the wealth of these nations. And unfortunately, that's how resources are accumulated in this. And so you realize that conflict, for instance, are fomented in some places. And these are more or less also superintended by the people from within. those who have vested interest in this exploitation of these resources. So within the context of the global village, for instance, you have the senior partner and you have the junior partner. And both have roles to play. That's the more reason why we have issues of debt, etc. And these are some of the intricate issues that need to be addressed. So we need to be able to vocalize, provide voices to the communities that are occupying these resource extraction spaces, but do not have the voice to be able to, so that they can be heard outside. But then at the same time, we need to be able to, there's a need for us to be able to reason out why these things are happening. Those who understand it need to be able to carry out the message, etc. And at the moment, we need to move from that narrative of just the resources that matter. We need to be able to impact on what dividends or what benefits are accruing to those who own the land or who own these resources. Whether the world is focusing on Africa or not, but we realize that the focus is more or less on what actually on the conflict side of things, but not necessarily related to the resource needs that are the resources that are needed elsewhere, but at the same time, and not on the benefit of what the people who own these resources actually need, but something that will provide stability, global stability. That is all we are interested in. For instance, if you take what has you mentioned about the coups in West Africa. First and foremost, is mainly about a rebel against this agreement that was signed with France, and that was more or less a rebellion against that agreement, because if you look at it, some of the minerals, the amount they have sold on the international market, for instance, uranium is sold on the international market for 80 cents, and 80 cents is given to the community. And whereas it's sold $200 on the international market. So what do you expect to use to be able to develop it? So those are some of the issues that need to be addressed. So it came to a point when the people said enough was enough. But then at the same time, you rebel against one force, and then you brought in another force because of the insecurity issue. So these are complicated issues that need to be addressed. But then you need to be able to understand it in order to be able to provide this kind of solutions that are needed for the future.
Yeah, and I quickly just want to say, three policies, 3 U.S. policies for Africa. The Young African Leadership Initiative, African Growth and Opportunity Act, and then also President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief. With YALI, right? Young professionals all across the continent come to the United States every year, right, to upscale in their capacity, and not necessarily that they need it, but what I think the utility is for them is that they are now interconnected with other people from the continent, right? A fellow from Morocco now has a relationship with a fellow from the Mid, which they might have never had, right? And then with, AGOA, that policy was really trying to alleviate some tariffs, trade barriers for African nations and U.S. companies. And then obviously the PEPFAR initiative is providing AIDS and HIV. But with all that being said, right, I personally believe that the global community, whether it's for their own personal gain, right, or for the continent, they have them in their sight. They have the continent in their sight. Like Dr. Anani said, whether it be resources or human capital. I think it's on us in the West to kind of be more consistent in our engagements with the continent, and also now move towards a mutually beneficial relationship. And for me, my personal opinion is just moving towards trade. So I want to get back to the book. Dr. Anani, you mentioned Nigeria and Ghana specifically in the book as failed leadership. So can you expand on this specifically? Well, for the most part, as I stated earlier, the Nigerian elections were categorized as being free and fair earlier this year. And for most people, Ghana is seen as a high value tourist destination, particularly for those of us that are African Americans in the United States, and an environment where business can be conducted on a global scale, where the country always has open arms to business. So could you kind of expound on what you were talking about in the book?
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Ghana and Nigeria are two sides of the same coin. What we have as something that, why I say that is what is going on there, I will say that is organized chaos. Organized chaos in the sense that, yes, elections are organized, but at the same time, because of opinions from our side, even if the elections are rigged, which normally happen, they are rigged, but then so long as a leader is elected without actually impacting on whether it's fair or not, yes, a leader is election has been elected, even though it may be clothed in an authoritarian arrangement. Politically, yes, elections have been organized, but then the question is, has the elections been free and fair within the context of the people participating, or within the context of only few of the people participating effectively? Economically, for instance, the narrative has been the same, even though one is more populous than the other. I mean, the two countries, one is more populous than the other, and one is more endowed than the other. The issue right now, at the moment, the central governor, the governor of the central bank is being investigated for embezzling serious funds. It's nothing new on the continent. So what you can just change the narrative, take out the names and put the other name there, and it's the same. Socially, we have educational institutions that are producing people with have big skills. And then at the same time, culturally, everybody wants to leave the country. That you, for instance, want to leave the country and not come back. There at the time when 60 years when a journalist was actually interviewing the youth, for instance, one youth said that when he finished school, graduate school, the only option that was left for him was to pack crates of bags of water onto trucks and go and distribute. That was the option that he had, but that wasn't his dream. So the journalist asked him, so did he think that Africa was a continent that you can fulfill your dreams? I said, yes, it was an Africa that you can fulfill a dream because of the daunting challenges. There are several challenges there which needs to be addressed. That's why he was hopeful. Because we were expecting that he may have said that. Oh yeah, because of the challenges that he said he was going to stay back. But at the same time, there are challenges. But then because of the challenges, he's hopeful. Because he didn't see any saving grace in the status quo. And that was in Nigeria. And it's not different from something that is in Ghana. So that's the more reason why I said there are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and to add to that, even in South Africa, right? Again, during my research, we find that youth unemployment and unemployment is the biggest in South Africa. Is the biggest one in the world. At least I'm not. And so you have young people with these degrees, but there's no marketplace, right? And so very frustrating. I remember interviewing a young man with an LLM. So that's the equivalent of a master's in law. And you would think if nothing else, he could find an internship as a clerk and then work his way up. But everywhere he went, they asked which university he went to, right? And so there were always constant barriers that he had to face. So that was a great point, Dr. Anani. And I saw that firsthand in South Africa. I want to go back to the audience for a question. Young lady in the back.
Hello.
Yep.
And I don't know. It's not like really like say because I have a question, but it's more about like economics. Like, so in my class at Howard University with Dr. Holmes, we learned about like foreign economic relations, like with like China and Russia. And I was wondering your thoughts on countries like China or Russia, like I don't want to say necessarily taking over like economics or like an aspect of that, but do you think it's beneficial to the continent, or do you think it's a detriment?
Just visualize that in the whole world, we have a $94 trillion economy. The US has about 22 trillion or 22 trillion. China has about 16 or 17 trillion. And the 54 nations of Africa, they have 2 trillion. So is that a fair share of global resources? And in this context, if you look at it carefully, you will also realize that most of the resources to generate this economy, this $1 trillion economy, most of it are coming from the countries that you mentioned or from the developing world. But here they are. So there is a need for restructuring of how these resources are accumulated in the system. So with regard to your question, whether it is fair to say that the jury is out there and you need to be able to understand. That's the more reason why we need to be able to understand how these resources are accumulated and how these economies are generated and in one way or the other, and it's driven by the arrangement within the economy, within the global community. Because if you take Africa, for instance, you still have one leg in the global economy and one leg in the subsistence. And how do you generate enough resources to be able to participate effectively? Because at times the leaders are talking about equality, but you cannot be equal or you cannot be taken seriously when you only occupy $2 trillion of a $94 trillion economy, the world economy. That's not, no one is going to, whoever owns has 22 or 23 will not regard when you are combined, you have 2 trillion. You are not going to be as far they will prefer to deal with you on individual basis rather than on continental basis.
Young lady up top, and then you, sir.
There's a lot of discussion on the population growth and projections, like a big boom in population growth on Africa and the continent of Africa. So in your framework, do you think that's a factor that should be taken into consideration, just with the demographic changes?
If I hear you correctly, you're talking about the demographics in terms of the population growth in Africa, whether it should be taken into consideration. Definitely, because one issue that is facing is youth unemployment, and they're idle, and they are vulnerable. There are no jobs, etc. And as I said, this is an army of people who want to get out of the place and look for greener pastures. So they are even prepared to even embark on a precarious journey to the Mediterranean to reach Europe and even to the shores of North America. They are prepared, and some of them perish during this journey, and some of them even fall victims to criminal gangs. So definitely, there is a need to take that into consideration, the youth population, because you are talking about over 200 million of the total population of the country, 20% of the total population of the yes, and 40% of the workforce, and 60% of the unemployed roaming the streets. So that needs to be taken into consideration seriously, and we don't need to put all our hands on the head and say that there's nothing to be done about it or we can't respond to it. There are things that can be done to reverse that. We can reverse this all this, because these are people, if you eliminate 1,000 today, tomorrow 1,000 will come who appear on the scene. So we need to have a strategy that should address this. But we can reverse all these things if the world or Africa and the international community pay serious attention to some of the suggestions contained in this subject.
Gentleman up top.
Oh yeah, thank you for your sharing, Doctor. And so talking about the economy in China, I just wondering, like, what is your opinion on the Beijing Lead Build and Road initiative, and also like the African countries always have like interactions with the AI, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
It's an interesting relation that needs to be looked at. And one question we need to ask ourselves is, has this relationship, which is very good in terms of the belt infrastructure and focus on infrastructure, without necessarily looking at issues of democracy, we need to be able to understand and ask ourselves this question: has that relationship led to fairness, or is it one-sided, or also leading to exploitation of just the resources, or is it leading to improving the welfare of the people on the ground, or is just that it's enriching only a section of the people who are in charge of those resources? Those are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves, because is it just continuing what we have gone through, the continent has gone through? Yes, infrastructure is very good. You invest in infrastructure, etc. But is it leading, in the case of Ghana, for instance, is it leading to pollution of water bodies, rivers, etc.? Because small small-scale mining, for example, has become something that has been dominated by foreigners, etc., but in collaboration with locals, because a foreigner does not know where those minerals are located. Is the local that will take them to the bush, etc. So we should ask all these questions and see and see whether the focused investment from outside is leading to equality or fairness within or improving the standard of living of the people. Those are issues that the jury is out there. You have to look at it and see what you make out of the situation on the ground. Language. Okay.
So how important
Language is key, is very important for all the things and issues that we mentioned in relation to ensuring effective representation. Language is key. So that's the more reason why we are asking to be able to use the people to utilize their own institutional arrangement so that they become familiar and be able to communicate among themselves, because these languages have been preserved for a long time, centuries. Yes, issues of governance, transactions and business, etc., are done in foreign languages. But at the same time, if you have the base where the people are able to communicate and conduct business within their language, that will be more helpful. That's the more reason why we are calling for a blend of the two systems. Because you cannot change that. You and I cannot, we are here, we are speaking and communicating in a foreign language because we've been to school, but not many people over the majority people have that privilege you and I have and be able to communicate. But they do understand and communicate in their local language effectively. So why do you have to impose something on them if they want to participate or if they want to ensure that their resources are utilized effectively? Why can't they do that within their own language or in their own language? So that's the issue. That's the more reason why we are saying that yes, the people that are able to converse fluently or understand the language of governance, etc., in other languages, should concentrate on the national assets that we do. But at the same time, at the community level, these local languages are prevalent, and we should concentrate on that. We should have that blended arrangement. At the local level, sure. National level, because the people who are there and in one way or the people who are at the national level, they understand this language. They speak the language. They are also from the community. The fact that they come from outside or they are able to educate themselves from within the establishment or external establishment, that doesn't mean they don't speak the local language. They do speak and understand the local language. So in terms of international transactions, local language is not going to pass. But you need people to be able to communicate and interact with people from outside and communicate effectively. But at the same time, within the context of local issues, let the people utilize their own language. That's the whole idea.
So getting back to the book quickly, you mentioned historical figures such as Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, and Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia as those with high moral character focusing on policies that are good for the collective and not just self-interest. Do you see a current leader on the continent who exudes those characteristics? And if so, who? And what methods are they using to build strong institutions, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mentioned those names in the context of the challenges of governance that we have, because the caliber of leadership that we need in the context regarding transformational and servant leadership. That's the more reason why I mentioned those things. At the same time, I move on to mention that there is a need for countries to be flexible to look at the values of transformational and servant leadership, because a servant leader is the one that would be able to serve, to lead, first lead and before serving others, eschewing avoiding self-interest. Transformational leader is the leadership that sees fulfilling needs as mainly as a condition to for transformation, and be able to manifest this success for everyone, taking into consideration how to be able to bring people together. You want me to be able to identify one part, whether there is
They can be local as well.
Sorry?
They can be local as well. They don't have to.
No, yeah, that's the more. I am not going to mention any name that whether they are there, but at the same time, there is this phrase that there is no saving grace in the status quo. I made that very clear in the book. Why? Because we need to be flexible. Countries need to be flexible to choose their own leaders that they think that exemplify these values. Because what kind of values they focus on solutions, and that they are able to build community, penetrate the grassroots, and build, able to mobilize the people around common vision, etc., common goals, and end it. So, like the NBA, if you talk about NBA, for instance, those who have played, or the fans can choose their starting five, for instance, whoever starts. It's up to them. It's up to anyone to choose the leadership that they think has those values, can play this role, and etc. But I am not going to be there and be able to pinpoint whether some of the intention might be there, but if the structure militate against it, you may not be able to articulate what you want to or put it in practice. It may still be buried in the broken promises, etc. So that is something that we need to be able to look at carefully, because the jury is out there to let us know who has these values and who has these principles. Because there are these things do not come by chance, have to be learned, have to be imbibed, and be able to practice it. So you may have the intention but not be able to make sure that you are able to practice it. So I will not mention any name. I will not pinpoint anyone. So you choose, everyone is, and transfer leadership is not limited only to those who are at the top. You can choose to be a transfer leader if your position, your authority, or whatever you are, is derived from the public first. Everybody can choose, every public official can choose to be a transfer leader. You don't have to be at the top to be able to serve others, to lead to serve. You don't have to be like that to be able to do that. We need to be able to be flexible enough to ensure that this is how we will be able to acquire those values and those principles in order to guide ourselves.
before we close out? Last question. Go ahead.
And that's the more reason why you are hitting the nail on that's the more reason why the blended representation principle is being advocated, because I believe that the people are not engaged because we are using different way of engaging them. We are using mechanisms that alienate them. So if they are able to utilize or knowledge and language that they are familiar with, and leadership that they themselves have nurtured, and preserve all this work, they will be able to assess this leadership, influence their leadership, and then ensure that there is horizontal accountability for the resources that they use. And then this will lead to strengthening of local institutions, and then collective share of influence in order to be able to shape our behavior and attitude and mindset at the top, especially among those who hold public offices, etc., so that they can ensure vertical accountability as well. So that's the reason why we are calling for a blended way of looking at things, because definitely at national level, there are folks who believe that if we don't imitate or we don't embark on wholesale verification, nothing will. But if nothing is going, not much is happening, and they always ensure that people stay within their lane as well. The literature even talk about weaponization of power, because if you are poor, all you need to do is to concentrate on your basic needs. You remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? You need to focus on your daily needs, etc. And without even being concerned about what is going on in the governance or organizational life of the community or the nation. So if you are poor, it's in the interest of certain people for you to remain in that situation, because you are not going to disturb them. But we need to, if we really want transformation, we need to be able to do something about it. That's the more reason why we are calling for a blended nature. And the fiscal tax is to ingrain that in the psyche of the community, that this various that having the solution to these critical challenges can come from a blend of both what has the so-called informal and formal institutions. That's the critical topic to be able to begin that in the center.
Thanks, Dr. Anani. So as we close out, I think I can speak for Dr. Anani when I thank NYU's DC campus for highlighting such a relevant topic, leadership and good governance, and highlighting Dr. Anani's book. Again, we would like to thank Dr. Carrie Miller, Vicky Cagle, and Tom McIntyre for hosting us. And once again, let's give Dr. Anani another round of applause for his extensive research and his new way of looking at this systematic and elongated problem, right? As he said earlier, these solutions will not be 12 months. They might not even be 12 years, right? And lastly, thanks to you all in the audience and also virtually for engaging us. If you're a novice or in Africa, I hope we sparked your interest. If you're engaging with the continent for work, I hope we have added the human element to the conversation. And if you're an expert out there, I hope you learned something new. So thanks all and have a good night.